Hey, welcome everybody. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group. And thanks for coming to today's Coffee Break webinar, How Do We Manage Rights? It's the fourth in a set of rights education webinars that we've been doing this fall and will continue into 2022. Today's 30-minute session is going to provide insights into managing rights within a publisher. Retha Patterson was going to cover the who, why, how, and what happens after as related to collecting and managing rights data, and then utilizing that data to inform and improve rights dealing between the publisher and potential licensees. We're fortunate today to have Chris Kleeman, who's chair of our rights committee, to moderate the conversation with Retha and to kind of keep us on track as we go forward. Chris, very much thank you for being here today, and I'll turn things over to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm really pleased to have Retha here. You've had access to her biographical statement. I like to highlight the fact that she worked in rights, went off and got a PhD and missed being in rights, so she came back. And you'll hear as she speaks about this topic that because of the range of publishers she's worked with, she's had a lot of interesting experiences on how to think about rights sort of from a bird's eye view, getting to the commonalities across all kinds of content. And I hope that'll be useful to those of you who are listening. In addition to her work in rights and her academic studies, she continues to work as a freelance literary editor and translator. She sometimes blogs about rights, writing, and drawing, and she is a poet. So, Retha, thanks for being here. And let's just jump right in. I know you wanted to start a little with sort of who manages rights, why have someone dedicated to licensing, and also who do we manage rights for, and why does it matter?
Okay, thank you, Chris, for the introduction. I'm really pleased to be here. So in order to answer that question, I wanted to kind of think about whether it's important to have expertise or not. So training experts who at once have a kind of a broad knowledge of copyright and can spend time learning about rights markets and how to place rights clearly improves rights acquisition and sales and the processes that underpin them. Specializing in this area allows one to learn about and understand really the art behind the transactions, and that as well improves sales and customer relationships. And that expertise leads to results. And that's why most publishers have some form of rights function, whether that's a very large sales team or just one person managing rights and permissions. Of course, whether you're an expert or not, or whether you have a specialism or a specialist team in your company or not, it's wise in some measure to concentrate on getting a rights system in place. And I think it's essential. I've always thought it essential from the first moment I started, because being of a kind of a logical nature and having studied linguistics and translation, you need a system. And when you start to see the kinds of transactions you deal with, the minute stages of those transactions, what can go wrong and what you can miss in those in between the stages, you start to realize that the more granular a system you have, the more data-rich system you have, the better you're going to be at what you do. So as I say, I think it's essential to have a data-rich system. And even if that's just a spreadsheet or going up to a really robust system that's built for rights, if you don't have a robust system, you can still work with spreadsheets. You just need to remember what information you need. Is it going to be in a notes box? Is that sufficient? What needs to be a data point? How you link those data points together, and how that whole picture links to your book metadata or your magazine metadata or whatever. And the aim should be to get together as data-rich a picture as you can, that you can interrogate easily and that you can use. How useful is it to you in the form that it stands? If it's not, you need to shake it up and think again. I don't just think that this helps the administrative side, although it does, but once you have a system that shows you what you need to know, that informs the selling process, and it can bolster your customer relationships. And then in turn, that can give you more time to promote those things, i.e. to spending more time with customers. So whoever manages rights can do it well, I think. and can understand more quickly what importance you can attach to the things that you know about the books and how they sell. I also think that having this richer data picture allows you to share better insights with authors and agents and editors so that they understand why the books sell, also why they might not sell. But when you have at your fingertips very sophisticated or at least workable analytics, you can in turn inform acquisition choices, for instance. So this can help you retain authors, but also not to overpromise what you can deliver for authors. So you can be more careful about overpromising, and you can, because you have this rich data picture, you can build very persuasive narratives about what sells, why you have an editorial policy to produce certain kinds of books, and what that kind of editorial policy might allow you in terms of rights sales in different territories where different things are of importance. Certain types of books will sell well and which just don't, and you'll understand why, and you'll be able to explain that to everybody you work with.
Yeah, I think it's nice that you emphasize the beyond the administrative capabilities, the insights you can get in terms of improving your selling, or indeed sharing with your editors and improving acquisition. I don't know if you would have any examples of that. I'm trying to think from my own experience, but the idea that we have so many meetings with potential buyers and they'll tell us this kind of book doesn't work in our territory. And then I meet with someone else immediately later. Actually, I meet with 19 people immediately later, right? And if I haven't captured that remark from that person, I might not remember later to tell somebody, look, it sounds like in this territory in Italy, these kinds of books aren't going to work. We should just think of that next time we're doing submissions or next time we're. It's very helpful.
It's such an important point, because your meetings with publishers where they give you this kind of information, or with the usual kind of backward and forward in email, catching that kind of information is so important. And it's wonderful if you have, if you can keep that all in your memory, and some people can, and there is a certain amount to right selling where you do keep that kind of territory information in your mind, right? That just kind of sticks. But when you have a data structure and you have a system, and you have, if you're able to capture all your transactions, so what you submitted, what was on interest, why was it declined? If you have that, then you have at your fingertips a simple way of cataloging all of the reactions and the decisions. So I do have an example of that. If you have rich data to mine, if you have a system where it captures all your transactions at stages, why it was cancelled, the reason. In the system I used to have with my previous company, you could put that kind of information in. So you were able to go into your reporting suite, click a button, and then you'd see something was on option and why it was declined. So I could see, okay, 10 publishers were looking at this book, and the notes to say why they rejected it was too short, it wasn't for the market, and the academic profile wasn't to the curriculum. I know that immediately then. I know this kind of book just doesn't work in this market. It won't work. It doesn't fulfill the criteria of that kind of book that would sell. So if you've tagged a publisher conversely to say this publisher only likes, if it's say fiction, they only like works of high fantasy, they can only be over 500 pages because short books don't work in the territory. German readers of fantasy want long, involved reading, right? That's what they want.
Right.
And they don't want genre bending in certain instances. If you're able to capture that as data and append it to a transaction, you've cut your work down, and then you have a wonderful historical record of all of the books you sent out, submitted, all the books you've had an option, and you don't have to keep all that in your memory. You can just go to your reporting suite and you can work out why. And again, it's if you're trying to capture this to communicate with your colleagues or editors or authors, you have much more a richer picture that you can share.
Yeah. You said notes field, and I just want to, I know your answer on this. We don't want anyone to walk away from here thinking that it's okay. They can just have a big old gob of notes in somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The idea is to figure, and I know you've done it many times, is to figure out what are those categories of things you need to capture. So reason for rejection, or, you know, date and reason for rejection, that kind of thing. Break those down. Don't just keep those in
Absolutely.
giant piles. Do you, just going maybe back to a little bit the admin piece of it, there's a lot of potential workflow impact, right, when you have a good database. So you've said a little bit about that, but maybe you want to talk about that, you know, how really to manage to improve the workflows.
Yeah, I mean, if you set up a contract with a publisher and you've given them a deadline to make the translation by or produce their edition by, and then you have, they need to return their contract by a certain date and pay by a certain date, and your contract will expire at a certain date. If you don't have those as kind of data points that you're tracking, you haven't done yourself any favors. So you haven't matched the process to how you're going to track them. And of course, if you have 5 contracts and you have a very small, pot of transactions to manage, it's fine. But then if you keep selling rights, you're going to hit that point where you can't manage it like that anymore. And as I said, notes fields are okay for certain information, but if you have a workflow, you need to point by point work out what you're tracking and do it automatically as possible. I think anyone who's dealt with a big body of rights, lots of legacy titles, you come in and there's hundreds and hundreds of contracts. There's no real other way than to take everything out of a notes box, properly work out where the data points are, make sure that you have thought about the logic between the steps, like how long do you have to wait until you've got the translation and then the contract expires. It's worth laying down a very solid foundation, a structure to put those data in and then work from there.
Yeah. And do you find yourself developing a sort of weekly, monthly, even daily set of tasks that you know you're going to approach, so that you're pulling that? A lot of times, I've experienced this, we spend time designing a database that can do a lot of things for us, but we don't necessarily get everyone in the routine of using those tools. So how do you set yourself up? I know for me, sometimes it was governed by the financial reporting of the company, that I had to write a report for my boss on a monthly basis. So monthly, I was checking in on these KPIs, or around book fairs, before you met with someone, you would certainly round up all the pending contracts or all the new deals that have been made or any outstanding payments, that kind of thing. Did you set your week or your team up in that way to capture this, to use this data?
Yes, yeah, we'd have regular meetings. We'd always share the reports that came out of the different stages. So we'd see what options were expiring, what terms were in discussion when deals should be closing. And because we would talk about these things, and these would be points in a meeting, they were always followed, and there was a certain kind of enthusiasm to work out, who was discussing terms what, and how soon could we close the deal.
Right.
On the other side of that, you mentioned book fairs, and I think it would be worth talking about a certain point of functionality that the previous system I worked with had, because it would just show you how useful having a real good data structure can be. We had a function called a profiling. It sounds sort of kind of espionage, but it wasn't. It allowed us to create a profile of a publisher with all of their information in it. So it would just give their address and all those things, but it also lists the subjects they were interested in. And it would list every single transaction that they had at what stage. So if it was an interest, but we hadn't granted an option because the system plugged into our publishing system, it also gave the forecast publication date. So if that changed, we'd see it. If anything was an option and the option was closing, if the translation was late and it had passed a date, every single thing was listed, plus whether their royalty statements have been submitted. And so having all of these stages with granular detail that you filled in helped with the process, and publishers and agents really loved this because it showed that we were thorough. And it helped them because they had a point of reference after, if you have 50, we all know 50 meetings at Frankfurt Book Fair, you're scribbling, you're tired, you can't keep up, with all the information you're being given. But if you can take away something that just shows you everything you have to follow up, that helps. And again, showing that you're thorough, I think, is really important in a rights department.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, as you said, that level of detail and the number of dates that you have to track. But that sounds fantastic to me, that there would be a fact sheet, almost like the way we work so hard in a publishing company on our title information sheets, to have that kind of customer information sheet is really, really useful. And they, of course, the customer, not only have you as their, someone they're licensing from, they have that from many other companies, and it is difficult for them to keep track too if they don't have a system on their side. So being the one who can help them, they don't want to be in breach of any contracts or missing any payments or missing deadlines, but it can be difficult on their side to track. So being able to supply them with that must have made you a kind of extra special, good person to do business with, because they would see it. Before we go any further, though, I want to also say, go back to, you mentioned that your system's integrated with other systems in the company. And so do you want to talk about the kind of things that get picked up from a title information system or a production system, marketing?
Sure. The system was great because, you mentioned the marketing. The system not only showed us title information, but it portaled into, if I can use that term, it portaled into the marketing suite. So we could go onto the title level, go into the marketing portal, and we'd instantly have the JPEGs of covers. We'd have all of the title information, long blurbs, short descriptions, reviews, and all of that material we could just draw instantly and know more about the title. I mean, this was a publisher with a big publishing list, so knowing every title personally was hard and probably impossible. And the system it also segued, so portaled into the sales figures, so we could see that immediately, and that helped us because it was live data. We could see the sales data, and often publishers, if they're going to put so much money into a translation, they want to. But it allowed us to do other kinds of reporting. So not only would we be able to run reports on what books were sold, we could say, an editor would say, what books are selling well of my list? Because of the way the reporting went into the publishing system, we could search by editor. Right. And then that would give us a whole list, and then we could sort by language, by format, and so forth. So thinking about how rights data relates to metadata in this instance really allowed us to very quickly spread understanding of what we were doing and showing us that we were doing quite a good job to everybody who asked us, rather than spending a week cobbling together a report from other spreadsheets. This
different
was just,
sets of data, from system. We've tended in our education series this year to really talk about, first you start with what rights have you brought in. So you're a publishing company, your editors have acquired titles, and they've gotten certain rights to publish, and then certain rights that a rights team would be allowed to license out. Then did your system enable you, or how did you figure out if someone turned up, if a new digital creator showed up, I'm making, apps or whatever people would turn up with, and I want all your books that are about a certain topic. Was it easy for you to find the books on that topic and the books for which you had rights?
Yes, I mean, that linked partly to, so I guess I should take those two things separately. The ability to find books on topic was good because the rights system I work with had search engine optimization. So we'd thought about how we would use a search. So the current publisher I have, you have to have like a word for word perfect search to find the books. Yeah. But in the previous publisher, because we work with because the system was bespoke, and we got to work with systems developers who had thought about UI, who thought about search engine optimization. We could put in keywords, search words, wildcards, so we could find, if the book is on the Enlightenment, stick in the Enlightenment, it would just bring up everything that was published on that topic.
Right.
And the authors you'd put in. So again, we were able to use that system as a search system. And because it would show you what rights we'd sold, and before we just put in what rights we had. So we would get all of the contracts in, and then we would load those into the system. That was quite manual, but it still worked. So we wouldn't keep it on a separate system. I guess our rationale was that we have one single true picture of the rights we hold as much as possible. And so we wouldn't have to go digging around in some filing cabinet. And I'm sure that's been my experience in the past, and it's in a certain extent the situation I'm in now because I've moved. But again, trying not to be in that situation, trying to make it instantaneous, that you know that you're comfortable and you're confident in selling the rights. And also, if you can turn around, you get a request in the morning from a publisher, and you're able to say by return of mail that you have the rights, your language is free, and I've optioned it to you, and here's the PDF for your review. That is the situation you want to be in. Yeah, did it all, and the publisher has barely drawn breath, and you've been able to do that whole part. Yeah.
I don't really have time to read this now.
Yeah. So that's the situation. That was our sort of goal. That was a kind of stated goal, that we wanted to turn this round quickly. And we put in a plan for the system to get us to that point.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe because you and I both, I've been in rights a little longer, and so I've seen things come up that didn't exist before when I first started. I'm sure that's true for you too, because digital has changed so many things for all of us, even in the past, 6 years. Do you think there's good advice on how to account for that in the future? So you're looking at an author contract, it has a set of rights in it. Maybe somebody will show up 10 years from now asking for something, holographic rights. How do you capture the actual document itself so that it's readable in your system? Do you think there's some way to put a field in that says, potential future adaptations, capturing that sort of in any format throughout the universe in perpetuity kind of thing?
Yeah, I think if you thought about your taxonomies correctly, I don't want to be kind of too legalistic about it, but because that formats change, you keep that list open-ended. So you'd say you can add to that. So if format, well, you can just keep adding to it, because you could have the holographic or the kind of virtual, the virtual, it could be, your space and you see it in front of you, like in modern sci-fi. You leave those taxonomic lists open to expand. So you really know what's going to change and what isn't. So a date is not really going to change, so you keep those static, and it should be a date field. But then if you have, as you say, formats, territories, those will change. That some of them have changed over a lifetime, and they've changed over yours. Yeah. So just thinking kind of logically, what can change? Again, that's kind of the idea of what will change in the future. How do you future-proof your rights system? Right. And where do you allow flexibility, and where you don't? Where do you need to, and where do you not need to? But I think we're just coming up to 25 minutes past, and I just wanted to mention, as you say, what's changed in rights. And I just wanted to kind of mention, although I've talked a lot about data, I still think about the real world of rights. And at the moment, I've been dealing a lot in social media, and I think that's an important part of rights. Following licenses, social media accounts is really important. And I work for a publisher who's really hot on design, because they publish comics and graphic novels. And so I've started to announce foreign publishers' editions on our social media accounts. And because social media is so good at showing you a network of interest and a network of discussion, it's a great source of intelligence of who buys your books, how does your licensee interact with other publishers, how do they interact with the customers. And I think keeping it real is really important, is just as important as thinking about the data. because you really want to see the afterlife of your sale as well. It might just be a transaction, but finding where you sell rights and what it really means in the world of readers and authors and fellow publishers is just as important to keep in mind.
Right. Good. I'm glad you got that in. Brian, do we have questions?
We do, and if anyone else who's currently on the call wants to add a question, please do so. The best place to do that is the Q&A box on the lower part of the Zoom window that you're probably looking at. So I was really tempted by starting the question, what does work in Italy? But I think that might be a bit granular. And we can probably delve into what a big old gob looks like.
Oh, I've got notes fields I could send you.
Yeah.
The question,
Likewise.
one of the questions we do have that we can start with is, does this approach work with, for example, agents? I mean, could the reverse be also true, that agents could create profiles of publishers and understand what they work with to be as well informed?
Yeah, absolutely. I know of several kind of agent systems, so it's just kind of changing the parameters. Really, you want to see which books you decided to agent for and what didn't work, and the same kinds of criteria for rejection and acceptance is just the same. So absolutely would work for agents.
Yeah, even down to editor, I would say. You might want to have an editor profile. This person at this company buys these kinds of books from me and is interested in this. And then in many agencies, they're also doing the foreign rights. So they have an identical set of criteria as a rights team in a company.
Yeah, I should have said that if you have a really good rights system, you can have a top level, which is the publisher, but you can also have a second level, which is each individual contact at a publisher, and your system can stream. You can say this publisher, this publisher is looking at all these books, but which contact at the publisher is looking at these kind of books. So you can, if you have a big publisher you work with and they have an editor for science and literature, you can branch those off. Absolutely. But again, it's thinking about the structure that underlies how you store that information.
Yeah.
And I think in a related way, I mean, are there challenges to creating this kind of flexible tracking and reporting system? I mean, how does this work for a smaller publisher? Do they need to be thinking about perhaps working with spreadsheets and exporting data, or is it practical to be thinking about investing to track their rights effectively?
It's a good question, because if the publisher at the moment, if they understand that their business goal, if the strategy is just to keep a kind of low-level rights ticking, a low-level rights sales ticking, then that's one thing. But the longer you leave it, if suddenly you start to make more sales, you're in a situation where you have a big chunk of stuff that you haven't really thought about the data, and it takes you longer to put in a system. Right. So in a sense, you're in the perfect position just to get in a simple system where you have all of the data points are tabulated and getting it in quickly, because the data set you're working with is smaller. And so in a sense, you have a better chance of starting off with a very clean system that actually could make you sell more rights in the future. So that's always something to think about.
I'll just put in the plug for the BISG Rights Committee's white paper from last year, where we had research done around the return on investment in a system, and got down to some very good metrics about what was the actual value. And in that paper, there's also a profile of several different existing vendors. And it does seem there's a solution for every size. I mean, it's not only about the biggest systems for the biggest companies. There are systems that are out there for the smaller publishers that work for us on a small scale as well. A spreadsheet will do it, just as Rita said. If you're publishing more books every year, it doesn't take very long to have too many to keep in your head. Right. And you have to have a way to put that down in a system.
And as soon as you export to a spreadsheet, the kinds of things that are contained in a title management system begin to age, so that if your cover changes, if your description is updated,
Your publication dates change, the date the manuscript's coming, you know, it can put a stall into your sales process if you're not tracking that kind of data.
Absolutely.
And earlier this week, we had a chance to talk with some folks who work in the mergers and acquisitions business. And they were talking about how to value a company, and specifically called out the importance of the intellectual property, the rights that you control, and the licensing agreements, and that up-to-date and effective records of where we are improves the value of a company. Even if you're not intending to sell it, it's still a component of the overall value. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we're just at time, Chris. So if I could, I'd like to thank you and thank Rita for making the time today to kind of walk through the better practice as it is for essentially managing and exploiting rights within a publishing house, and how to make that work globally. We'll be back in January. I think we're looking at the 20th for another final session in this initial series of our Rights Coffee Break webinars. And in the meantime, enjoy your holiday and have a happy and safe New Year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rita.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.